Hello and welcome to episode 079 of the Bit Beacon broadcast. It's April 7th, 2025. You can call me Kodax, and I am your host through this week's broadcast. So I got a couple of purchases in this past week, one of which came from Limited Run Games, a set of 2 games, and then another set of games, 3 games, from Video Games Plus, the Canadian retailer who is known for ordering reprints of rare and obscure games on all platforms. So let's start with their order. So I had been waiting quite a while for them to put out a second reprint of Atelier Ryza 2. This game is worth well over $100 in sealed form and like $80+ in a used format. And specifically for the PlayStation 4. So I had originally played the original Atelier Ryza on Nintendo Switch, and it runs, kind of not great there. And I've been spending more and more time with my PlayStation, especially once I got my PlayStation 5 Pro. So I've been wanting to revisit the series there. But I already had Atelier Ryza 3 for PlayStation. I picked it up when it was steeply discounted at another retailer. I think it was on Woot or Amazon. But I needed 1 and 2 on PS4. 1 had been in stock on Video Games Plus for quite a while, but I figured I would wait until the eventual reprint of 2, and sure enough, my patience was rewarded. I had a bunch of gift card credit to Video Games Plus from some orders that I had canceled and ended up purchasing elsewhere. So I was able to pay for it, along with a third game, another Atelier game that I didn't have in my collection for PlayStation, Atelier Lulua, the Scion of Ireland. So yeah, I'm glad to add 3 more Atelier games to my collection. The 2 games from Limited Run that I picked up are Wizardry, Proving Ground of the Mad Overlord, and this is a remake using all of the original source code from the very first Wizardry game back on one of those like DOS stations. Wizardry was the game that inspired stuff like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. Japan became obsessed with Wizardry. So it's cool to have the original game just with a different set of like graphical presentation. It looks really fun. I hear these games are super tough, but I've been wanting to check out kind of the game that sort of inspired so many games that I love. So I thought this would be a great way to do that by picking up the PlayStation 5 version. Limited Run sold this a few months ago. It's not technically a numbered Limited Run release. It's through their publishing partner, Clear River Games, which is essentially just Limited Run's European arm. The last game I have here is another game that's not part of the Limited Run numbered series, but it is published by them. And this is Metal Slug Tactics. So you may know Metal Slug from the arcades, a side-scrolling game where you rescue different people and you fight, Nazi-looking guys in a 2D side-scrolling action, fun. It's got like sort of a goofy charm to it, but it's notoriously difficult. So Metal Slug Tactics basically takes the aesthetic of Metal Slug games, gives you an isometric view, and lets you, go about it in a tactical turn-based kind of way. I hear this game is pretty tough, but I'm a big Metal Slug fan, and I love tactics games, so I couldn't not add this to my collection. Limited Run shipped me a copy where the seal is torn on the game, which normally I wouldn't care too much about it, but when I'm purchasing from Limited Run, a place that caters specifically to collectors, I do expect them to ship me brand new sealed copies. So I did contact their support. Sounds like they are going to send me a replacement. They didn't say anything about returning this copy, but I'm expecting that there will probably be some like return sticker inside the box with my new copy of the game, and then I'll have to ship this copy back to them. We'll see if that's the case, though. If I don't end up having to return this one, I don't know. Maybe I'll gift it to Ravenheart. It's not like he listens anymore. Okay, so what's going on and what's coming up? We have a couple things in the near future. So Hoyoverse is hosting a Honkai Star Rail 2nd anniversary event in Irvine at the Spectrum. Tickets are available on April 9th for about $40 US. It's likely to be a bloodbath, though. Tickets include several pieces of anniversary merchandise that aren't available for regular sale, and a seat at the screening of the Honkai Star Rail anniversary concert. There will also be some other non-ticketed activities happening at the Irvine Spectrum, including a voice actor panel and a merchandise booth. The actual anniversary concert is happening in China a few days earlier, but it will be available for fans to stream for free on YouTube. So why would anyone pay $40 to go to this event when it's going to be streaming for free? Well, it'll be probably your only opportunity to see it in a theater, and the anniversary merchandise that's exclusive to ticketed attendees will probably be valued at, $300, $400, $500 if you were a reseller. So that's why they're charging $40 for the ticket. They're doing 2 showings, one in the early afternoon and one later in the evening. There's only about, it looks like 100 seats or so, maybe 120 seats in each theater. Tickets do go on sale in 2 days, I think it is, I said, at 8 something at night, I want to say. And so I'm fully expecting that it's just going to be a big mess. You may remember I was able to attend the first anniversary event in Los Angeles last year, which they dubbed One Night in Penacony. That event was a really special one, and this one looks to be kind of a step down from that. But I'm still excited. I'll try to get tickets and hopefully attend, and I'll report back on my experiences here for you. Of course, later this week, I'm also going to the Nintendo Switch 2 experience in Los Angeles. I will talk more about that next week. But I did find out that there's going to be free parking, which is pretty cool. I was worried about where the heck I was going to park in LA. But not a concern, and it looks like there's going to be some swag. So hopefully I can get some of that and go over all the details and share everything I learned next week. Before we dive into this week's Nintendo Switch 2 blowout, we have one leftover piece of information to discuss from last week's Nintendo Direct. Nintendo announced that digital games on Nintendo Switch and Nintendo Switch 2 will soon work a bit differently. Introducing what Nintendo calls virtual game cards. Nintendo's goal here is to give those that buy games digitally some of the same kinds of flexibility that those who purchase games physically have. No, they're not going to let you sell your digital games back to Nintendo or to friends, but you will soon be able to share them in other ways not possible prior. Virtual game cards will be a new menu item on the main screen of the Nintendo Switch, or Nintendo Switch 2. Here you will be able to see all the games you own digitally, whether they are downloaded onto your Switch or not. If you own 2 different systems linked to the same Nintendo account, you will be able to swap out your digital game cards between the 2 consoles. Currently, the way it works is that you can download your digital games to any console you own and have your account linked to. But only one Switch can be set as your primary console, which means each time you want to launch a digital game on a non-primary designated console, the console has to perform a brief internet check to make sure you have permission to launch the game. With virtual game cards, you can launch the game whenever without the need to perform the internet check, as long as the virtual game card is previously loaded to that particular Switch. The other neat feature of the system is the ability to loan your virtual game cards to anybody in your Nintendo family account. For example, if Kodax and Ravenheart were in a family group together, Ravenheart could loan his virtual game card version of Pokemon Scarlet to Kodax for 2 weeks. After that 2-week period, the game would be returned automatically to Ravenheart, but Kodax would retain his save data. Ravenheart could loan the game out again to Kodax, or maybe Kodax decides he wants to buy it for himself and can then continue playing from where the save data left off. This means that up to 8 people can share their digital games with each other as long as they are all covered of the same Nintendo Switch Online family plan. This is a pretty nifty feature for people who have been heavily investing into digital games, and is clearly a further push from Nintendo to ease people into the Switch from physical to digital games. Meanwhile, physical games are still king. You can loan them out to friends with no restrictions. They require no internet checks at any point to launch the game. Plus, they retain their value and can be sold. Even though I am down on digital games, I can still respect the effort from Nintendo to do this. It's certainly an improvement, and I will be curious to see if Sony and Microsoft follow suit here. Alright, now on to the main piece of news we have. The moment we've all been waiting for. Since the debut of this podcast more than 18 months ago, we have been anticipating the Nintendo Switch 2, and it is finally here. The information blowout we have been waiting for has arrived. On April 2nd, 2025, Nintendo aired a 62-minute Nintendo Direct focused entirely on spilling the beans about the Nintendo Switch 2 games and hardware. There's a lot to digest and dissect, so let's start with the hardware itself. The Nintendo Switch 2 will launch in 2 editions. First, the console, in a matte black color without any game, for $449.99, and a bundle of the matte black console with the newly unveiled Mario Kart World digital copy for $499 US. This is definitely more expensive than many were anticipating the console to cost. Most were hoping the console to go for $399.99, but some of us suspected that it may go upwards to $500, so at least $449 for the non-bundled unit is somewhere in the middle. It's not a bad value proposition. Nintendo manufactures the majority of their consoles in China and Vietnam, 2 of the hardest hit countries by US tariffs. Funnily enough, Nintendo was primarily manufacturing their console in China during United States President Donald Trump's first term, and they moved a lot of their production to Vietnam after his hostility towards China to try and avoid these issues in the future. Obviously, their plan has kind of backfired. Nintendo, however, has smartly been anticipating potential volatility in the US market, and has been stockpiling Nintendo Switch 2 consoles in the US for the last several months. According to the Financial Times, in January alone, Nintendo brought in nearly 400,000 Nintendo Switch 2 consoles into the country. So it's possible they could already have upwards of 2 million consoles in the US. That should be enough to get them through the initial launch at the originally announced price point, but it's likely that the price on these consoles might increase down the line, as Nintendo is not likely to be eating any of that loss on behalf of the consumers. So what do you get with your $449 purchase? Inside the box, you will find a Nintendo Switch 2 console, Joy-Con 2 controllers left and right, Joy-Con 2 grip, Joy-Con 2 straps, Nintendo Switch 2 dock, ultra high-speed HDMI cable, a Nintendo Switch 2 AC adapter, and a USB-C charging cable. Pretty much the same things one would have found in the box for the original Nintendo Switch. So what is new? For starters, let's look at the console unit itself. The console now has a 7.9-inch screen, which looks massive compared to the 6.2-inch screen found on the original Switch. It's an LCD screen, not an OLED. More on the screen in a moment. The console itself has also gotten a bit bigger as a result, but still features the small bezel around the screen, leaving room for an even bigger screen and a potential revision in the future. It's very likely Nintendo's known for doing those iterative midpoint, kind of PlayStation 5 Pro, PlayStation 4 Pro, DSi, that kind of thing. So we can probably expect a Nintendo Switch 2 revision in 4 or 5 years, something like that. The screen itself is more than just large, it's also mightily impressive. The 7.9-inch LCD supports 1080p, high dynamic range for improved brightness and greater color accuracy, as well as a variable refresh rate, which will match the refresh rate of the screen to the source signal, which will reduce screen tearing and stuttering, which makes the image more smooth and consistent. Speaking of refresh rates, the Nintendo Switch 2 LCD runs up to 120 Hz. That means games will be capable of running up to 120 frames per second. That's some really next-gen stuff packed into this handheld. The console itself, when docked, is also capable of displaying games at 4K resolutions while being capped at 60 frames per second. If a game supports 120 frames per second mode, then the console will only be able to display at a 1080p resolution, which is still fantastic. So how the heck can this small portable console put out an image quality on par with things like a PS4 Pro and even some current generation games? The answer lies with the custom processor built in collaboration with NVIDIA. NVIDIA says their processor takes performance to the next level, featuring an NVIDIA GPU with dedicated ray tracing cores and tensor cores for stunning visuals and AI-driven enhancements. They say their ray tracing cores will deliver lifelike lighting, reflections, and shadow for more immersive worlds. and their tensor cores will power AI-driven features like deep learning supersampling, which you may remember Ravenheart talked about last year, which boosts resolution for sharper details without sacrificing image quality. This is the kind of AI power I can get behind. Finally, they say that their processor will produce 10 times the graphics performance of the original Switch. This console is truly a massive leap forward for Nintendo and will bring them up to par with their peers in meaningful ways. So what about the Joy-Con 2 controllers? Nintendo has made some improvements to their durability as well as their functionality. Nintendo has said that the Joy-Con 2 was completely redesigned. They are now more sturdy and reliable, so they say. Hopefully this means that Joy-Con drift will officially be a thing of the past. Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons were notorious for their poor thumbsticks, which eventually required Nintendo to offer permanent thumbstick repairs in the US, even outside of a warranty, to avoid a massive-scale class action lawsuit. One other huge feature is the ability for the Joy-Con 2 controllers to be used like a mouse. Nintendo showcased this functionality with a clip of Metroid Prime 4 being controlled in mouse mode. One Joy-Con is held normally, and the other is put rail side down where an optical sensor is hidden so you can move the Joy-Con around a flat surface just like you would a mouse. What makes this even more neat is the fact that the Joy-Cons have rumble functionality, unlike traditional mice, so you will be using something familiar in a new way with new sensations. I'm excited to experience that for myself, hopefully this Friday. So the Joy-Con controllers no longer slide into the Nintendo Switch 2. Instead, they now snap into place magnetically. A release mechanism on the backside of the Joy-Con will allow you to detach them. This is another improvement for durability, as the plastic rails on the original Joy-Con controllers were known for getting chipped and then having difficulty locking into position over time as the rails wore down. The console itself also has a new kickstand that allows for the console to go to some extreme angles and remain perfectly stable, unlike the original Switch, which just had a cheap plastic kickstand in the back. The Switch OLED improved things with a better kickstand, and the Switch 2 seems to be following its lead here. The Switch 2 will feature 256 gigabytes of internal storage, which is a massive upgrade over the 32 gigabytes found in the original Switch. What makes this kind of a mixed bag is that Nintendo will not use standard microSD cards if you want to expand your memory. You will need to purchase the much pricier microSD Express cards, which are a brand new format and much pricier than your average microSD card. The upside is that these new microSD Express cards will have speeds 10 times as fast as the fastest microSD card, so games will load and play significantly faster. That's a good thing. But the 1 terabyte option for the microSD Express is $200. That's crazy. So what about the dock? Well, the dock is now more power hungry than ever since it will enable the Switch to output into 4K. The dock now has a built-in fan to ensure your device stays cool and doesn't overheat. The AC adapter for the dock will also give the unit more juice than your prior AC adapter for the original Switch, so it will not work with the Nintendo Switch 2 dock, your original Switch AC adapter. Though it will still charge your Nintendo Switch 2, Nintendo says, when plugged directly into the console, so it still has some use, don't just toss it out. So what about the games? Well, I won't be discussing the game announcements from the Nintendo Direct on this episode. I'll save that for after I attend the Nintendo Switch 2 Experience event later this week, and I'll report on all of that in next week's episode. I did want to talk about the new cartridges and the pricing structure. This is where things kind of soured for me with the Nintendo Switch 2. So while the $450 price for the console hardware itself is actually a pretty great value considering its capabilities, I'm left scratching my head in regards to some of the other decisions around the pricing of their games. First, let's remind everybody that the Nintendo Switch 2 is backwards compatible with Nintendo Switch games. There's a small list of about a dozen games or so that aren't currently functional on Nintendo Switch 2, Nintendo says, but none of the titles are major and publishers are working on getting them functional in time for launch, or sometime down the line. A handful of existing Nintendo Switch games are getting Nintendo Switch 2 versions, titles such as The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, for example. If you already own these games digitally or physically, you can spend $10 on the upgrade pack to get the enhanced version of the game. However, Nintendo will also be selling Switch 2 versions of those games digitally and physically, and they expect players to shell out $70 for the upgraded version of Breath of the Wild, which was originally $60 when the Nintendo Switch first launched, and $80 for the upgraded version of Tears of the Kingdom, which was originally $70 when Tears of the Kingdom first launched, almost 3 years ago now? In the case of Breath of the Wild, that game is already 8 years old, and they are attempting to charge full price, plus they are baking in the cost of the upgrade. Why wouldn't they just charge the same price for the Switch and the Switch 2 version? Or better yet, price them as an entry-level remaster for $40 or $50 like PlayStation and Xbox do. This has now set a precedent that every cross-generation game will be more expensive on Nintendo Switch 2. For example, it was revealed that Pokemon Legends ZA, releasing this fall, will get both a Switch and a Switch 2 version. That's really good news, because Game Freak games need that extra power. If the retail price of the regular Switch version is $60, then we can be sure that the Switch 2 version will be $70. They're sending a message that Switch 2 is a premium luxury, and Nintendo is getting straight up greedy here in my opinion. Sadly, third-party publishers are also following suit with similar pricing for their games too. Nintendo introduced another piece of bad news. Game Key Cards. Game Key Cards are a new type of physical Nintendo Switch cartridge, except instead of buying the actual game loaded onto the game card, the Game Key Card will merely prompt a download of the game when inserted into Nintendo Switch 2. The Game Key cartridge will need to stay inserted into the Nintendo Switch 2 in order to play the downloaded game, so you can still loan it and sell it like you would a regular physical game, but none of the actual game data is stored on the cartridge. So that's bad for preservation's sake, and also it means that the game will take up more of that 256GB storage space on your Switch 2. Get ready for that 256GB to fill up fast. Physical cartridges that are Game Key cards will have a banner printed on the front of the game case notifying consumers that they're not buying a game. They're buying a Game Key card. Nintendo created this cartridge as an option for third-party publishers who had complained of the cartridge prices for manufacturing of the original Nintendo Switch. So now publishers can spend far less on cartridges and still claim they have a physical version available. So far, we have seen that Nintendo will not be using these cartridges for their own games. That's good news. But publishers like Square Enix, Capcom, and Konami have all shown that their launch games will be on Game Key cards. My fear is that most third-party publishers will always opt for the cheap Game Key cards for their physical games. I'm saying that with quotes. The fact that it is so prevalent with the third-party titles immediately at launch is a bad sign. The only thing we can do, those of us that like physical games, to convince publishers that this is a bad idea is by not purchasing the Game Key card products at all. Of course, that could backfire, and they could just say, well, I guess, gamers don't want our games physically anymore, not realizing that it has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with how they're distributing the physical game to us. With Game Key cards, you're not distributing a physical game to anything. You're really not. It's basically a license on the cartridge that you plug in, which tells Nintendo servers, hey, download this game. I'm a little concerned about how that's even going to work if you buy a game in another region that maybe isn't available on your Nintendo Switch's region's local eShop. Will it even download that game? I really don't know how this is going to work. The whole thing is really kind of sketchy. Not only is it sketchy, it's baffling to me. What is even the point of buying a physical game that doesn't even contain the game at all? That means when Nintendo shuts down the servers for Game Key cards at some point in the future, that download won't trigger, and that Game Key card cartridge will be worthless. I never expected Nintendo to be one of those to help expedite the all-digital future, but I fear they may have done just that. So when does the Nintendo Switch 2 go up for pre-order? Well, it was supposed to be Wednesday, April 9th, but Nintendo has now delayed pre-orders until an undetermined time. Why? While I was hopeful Nintendo was going to be able to avoid the worst damage from the tariffs by importing the console into the country early, it seems I was wrong. Nintendo is now back to the drawing board with the price of the console here in the US. Nobody knows yet how much the Nintendo Switch 2 will cost now, but we know the declared value of the device at customs is about $380 US. So we can expect that Nintendo will increase the price probably anywhere from $50 to $150 US. That's right, the Nintendo Switch 2 could cost US consumers for the basic edition without the game bundle upwards of $600 US. End transmission.